Hello everyone, my name is Apple, and my Chinese name is Lin Yunting. And today I'm going to talk about an article about listening equals comprehension, myth 3. In this article, I will divide it into three big parts. In the real world, what the research says, and the last is what we can do. And there are few small parts in each big part. In the University of Pittsburgh English Language Institute, the author said that one of the many joys was working with new teachers, and the school has a program of strong classroom observation. The supervisors will visit the classroom many times in one semester, and the author was one of the supervisors. And the author was sitting at the back of a classroom in the basement and watching a new graduate teacher teach in a lower intermediate class. People mishear all the time, and children have the limited vocabularies. They fit what they have heard into what they know. John Irving's book, The World According to Greg, warned about the undertow in the ocean and imagines the undertow. Entire websites are dedicated to collect mandarins, especially for rock lyrics. Listening is not all about background knowledge. Other language skills which we characterize as bottom-up are implicated in listening. For many years, since the teacher began to teach listening, the researchers made the distinction between teaching and testing. Many of those researchers have criticized the dominant trend in listening instruction as doing nothing to teach students how to listen. Playing audio and asking comprehension questions, asking students to complete tasks. There are challenges to what might be called the comprehension approach, listening from several directions in recent years. The first concern is that teaching bottom-up skills in addition to comprehension skills. The second concern is that teaching strategy use, especially metacognitive strategies use. The third position is that Jack Richards notes that we have ignored activities which require accurate recognition and recall of words, syntactic and expression that occurred in the input, such as dedication, close exercises, identifying differences between a spoken and written text. But Richards argues that we should have a second step in our listening classes that focus on listening as acquisition. Working with the inputs in written form like vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation, and utilize spoken activities like role plays and dialogue helps students to acquire the language they have heard. In this chapter, we will concentrate on the progresses involved in the bottom-up listening, and the next organize the material in terms of what makes listening more difficult. Speech comes at the listener in an unbroken stream. If you want to make sense of it, the listener must break the stream into groups of sounds, recognize the groups as words, recognize the meaning of the words, and understand how the words are related to each other, the immediate context. The conversation up to that point, called the context, which helps the listener get words in the context and influence the interpretation of mispronounced words and words with multiple meanings. Another element of decoding is phrasing. It means that giving the words a grammatical meaning. listeners have to figure out who did that to whom. We need to listen first for meaning. Means that we don't explicitly focus on grammatical forms. There are clauses listeners typically use to facilitate phrasing. In English, assume a normal word order of SVO, subject, verb, object. A single subject will agree with a single verb. We will get information from pronouns. There are other sources of information that don't rely on the sentence grammar. Animacy is the quality of being a living thing. We understand that old information gets commented on by new. These clues, as well as textual ones like collocations, pauses that serve to break the speech stream, like comma break, written text, intonation, can signal questions and statements. Many reductant signals actually do a fairly efficient job of decoding. There are cases of ambiguity, like words with multiple meanings. Reductancy and context are usually able to quickly resolve any problems. For the past 30 years, listening teachers have concentrated on building schemata. On the comprehension side of the equation, fluent listeners are able to process top-down, making use of word and contextual knowledge, until a breakdown in understanding the necessities, the focus on the use of bottom-up resources, attention to individual sounds and words. Wolf said that the top-down process makes up for the gaps in knowledge of points is the language. The first one is the process is interactive. The second one is to draw attention to the use of the word fluent. Fluent listeners need both top-down and bottom-up skills. Many of students are not fluent listeners because students are lack of ability in bottom-up processing. They may have trouble segmenting the speech stream into words or not be able to efficiently and automatically recognize the words they know. When you think about what it takes to understand a main idea, you can understand why a less skilled listener has a difficult time and want to retrieve more knowledgeable individual words. Understanding the main idea involves integrating information from many parts of the text. Sometimes the answer can be matched directly to a word in the text. The connection between less capable listeners and an over-reliance on bottom-up processing was the conclusion of Cui and Foley-Love. They tried to discriminate the effects of schema, type and question type on the test scores. Matching schema type was one which the schema activity remained valid throughout the input. Non-matching schema was one in which first, then another, schema was activated on the basis of the input. Through the analysis of the interaction between schema and questions, they conclude that less skilled listeners rely more on the bottom-up listening. The first step in listening is breaking up the speech stream, keeping in mind that while words are broken apart on the page, making reading easier is important. There are no white spaces between the words in speech. They flow together. It is the listener's task to break them apart into a meaningful way. This will make it harder for the language learners because they learn dictionary forms of words frequently. So they cannot recognize them in a speech if they change the form or the pronunciation. Words are also subject to elimination, addition, and insertion. All these processes make the comprehension more difficult. In addition to the phonological modifications that speech undergoes, there are effects on the listening from accent, prosody, speech rate, pausing and hesitations, genres or discourse, structure, and the nonverbal signals like the body language. Teachers often tell their students to listen for the key words, which is the most important word in a passage. Words are divided by grammarians into context and function words. The concept of the content word includes nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Function words serve a grammatical function, like prepositions, articles, and auxiliary verbs. Function words are also the glue of language, which makes them among the most frequently used and heard in English. They are not normally stressed within the sentences unless we contrasting them. Learners had a variety of the first languages, while all were classified by the school as the intermediate level. The study were divided into two groups, higher and lower proficiency, and the native English speaker were also divided into two groups, which based on their achievement in their class. Better group was able to transcribe both context and function words. All language groups performed on average of 20% lower on transcribing function words than content words. Proficiency had an effect that higher level students performed significantly better on both words. Even more advanced students had more trouble in hearing the function words. They used their knowledge to hear things that aren't stressed. Everyone is subject to the confusion at the time because function words are not stressed. When confronted with new words in the input, learners completely ignore the context and the sound system and substitute a known word for an unknown one. Word boundaries may get incorrectly assigned or a short word wrongly pulled out of a longer word, and words may be misheard. Broshima and Clutter concluded that even if students know a word, they might not be able to recognize it in speech. And the biggest problem is that in word recognition is probably distinguishing real words from non-words or near words. Students also measured by error rate, the number of times a word was missed. There were two groups, each of which received instruction in reductions, contractions, stress, and intonation in English. The control group transcribed 500 words of authentic English speech a week. The experimental group also received instruction on English phonetics. The experimental group improved the reaction time and error rate. The vast majority of English words are either accent on the first syllable or monosyllabic. Word stress helps segment words for native English speakers because strong syllable is potentially the start of a new word. There are three things that we can do. The first is work on knowledge of bottom-up processes. The research shows that word recognition and phonological processes are important elements of decoding. Bottom-up is not straightforward because it's not clearly explicit teaching. The pronunciation task works on stress. First, learners listen and practice repeating questions and answers. Then they look at some questions and circle the words that they think is stressed. Last, they check the answers. The popularity of minimal pair practice has come and gone and come back again. Second is don't forget vocabulary. We need to spend more time on teaching vocabulary and also spend time reviewing. Most important thing is students need to know a word if they use it in listening. We also need to teach various forms of the word beyond the dictionary. Third is use task, not comprehension questions. The main issue in here is teaching versus testing. Listening classes didn't always make the distinction. Students don't always think about to read the question first, then read the passage or listen to the audio. So, seeing the answers is not necessarily the most important thing, but seeing the question is the most important. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.